Right, see if this is working. It is, but it needs to be a bit hotter. For some reason this tip isn't heating up properly. Got a poor connection somewhere on this cable. Let's try the other one. Could be the pen. Oops. Yeah. That cable's not going to work. Okay. Yeah. That feels loose as well. Ah dear, I just have to go and switch to using the spoon shader rather than the flat shader. Can't get this to heat up properly. Okay, seem to be getting some heat out of it now. So we'll just outline the shadow which is underneath the front of this locomotive. Now this bit will go almost black ultimately, but just for the moment I just want a darkish edge just to act as a shade sort of scale, because knowing this is going to go darker, then the space above it will be the lightest. In fact, this is almost the darkest part of the whole image. If you're watching, feel free to say hello in chat. I only bite very rarely. Sorry if you're watching. I've got a problem with this pen, or the connector. I never have been particularly enamoured with this style of connection, but for high current work, which is what's happening here, but this pen is just not making a good enough connection, and that means the tip isn't heating up properly. And I'm not actually sure whether it's the cord or the pen itself. The other thing that it means is that the top of the pen around here gets really hot as well as it's trying to pass the current. Okay, well, it's heating up at the moment, so we'll see how it goes. This pen isn't performing particularly well tonight. What I may have to do is swap it out for my other pen, but I won't be able to do that until the tip's cooled off. Okay, well, we're getting somewhere now. And the tip is heating. And if anybody's watching, what I'm just doing here really is just a practice piece. It's on hardboard rather than what normally pyrography normally gets done on a lighter board. Partly because you end up with the ability to have a lot more shades, than are currently possible here, because you're starting with a darker wood anyway, and it won't actually get any darker than you know, an almost black colour, which is what you'd get on a white or a whiter board. But what it does mean is that you haven't got the ability to use some of the really lighter shades that you would normally have with a whiter board, so it just compresses the colour range that's available. But in any case, it's interesting to do something different from time to time and use different boards. They all react differently, different woods react in different ways to being heated in this way. It's the resin which actually is turning brown, the resin that's in the wood, and if you were able to see it in enough detail, what you can actually see is it's kind of glazing, so you get like the sap effectively of the wood is being lifted out of the wood, and it's that's going brown with the heat from the pen, and then it is actually slightly going slightly glossy here as well. Yeah, certain woods have more resin, or will expose that resin more. I mean, hardboard obviously, as well as a glue component to it, which also has an impact on things. I think what I'm going to do is switch this to using a spoon shader rather than that flat shader, which isn't performing as well as I'd like. So turn that tip temperature down, because I know this spoon shader doesn't need it that hot. Okay, we've got another dark area here in the head of the loco, and this area here is actually, on this particular locomotive, is where the air horns are. So if you're familiar in the UK with the two-tone horns that you get from the rail engines, then this is where they actually emanate from on this particular class of locomotive. A little bit more temperature there. Now the spoon shader that I'm using here, it's called that because it's actually a spoon shape, which you may it's probably too, I don't think it's going to focus, but you might be able to see it there. It's a spoon shape, and I've got to be careful not to touch this because of course it's hot. Well, yeah, it's not really going to focus, is it? But it's very much like a small spoon in shape, whereas the other one, which is a flat shader, is so called because it is actually almost completely flat on the bottom. You can see there, you probably almost can't see the blade itself. But anyway, so it's called a spoon shader, and what that means is you've got a lot more versatility in some ways, but it is also harder to control, especially when you want to produce a smooth output, because with it only almost having one dot of contact, it's great for doing things like this, and it can work really well when you are shading, because what you've got is you've got the bowl of the spoon, so you've got the contact which is actually applying most heat to the wood, and you've got the bowl which is behind it, which is then applying some sort of preheat, if you like, to the wood, which allows you to make a graduated shade a lot easier, whereas with a flat shader it's kind of like using an iron. It's an all or nothing, and it can be actually harder to make a neat, smooth, all in one colour gradient across the piece. But equally well, it's as I say, using a spoon shader sometimes can be quite difficult, because it is a point source of heat, and so sometimes, especially if the wood's not reacting too well, then what you get is you get almost like grooves in the wood, and the colour graduation isn't as good as you might like it to be. But unfortunately my flat shader is not working too well today. The pen is not making very good contact with the cable, and so it's not holding its heat. What I'm going to need to do is, it's not one of my fixed tips, it's a screw tip, so what I'm going to have to do is probably switch it over to a spare pen that I've got and see if that one reacts better. Now again, this is quite a dark area. Don't want to make it black in this particular case. What I would like to kind of do is, there is some detail visible behind it in the original, and it would be nice to try and at least make some of that detail visible in a real dark burn. Probably not visible on stream, but this actually isn't as smooth a colour as I'd like, but there's not a lot I can do about that at the moment. Let's see if I can bring this darker still. Just give it a little bit more heat. One of the best ways with pyrography like this, especially for shading, is not to try and do it all in one go, and try and actually get it, go almost black in one pass. You can do it. You can turn the heat up on these tools until they're actually glowing, and then the wood will react really quickly, of course. and it will go really dark black. But one of the problems you get with that is that the wood then actually shrinks away from the tool, and you actually get a really uneven surface, which especially if you're trying to make it black, because it then becomes very shiny as well, actually reflects light, and in reflecting light from some angles it doesn't actually look as black as you wanted it to be. It's a great way of texturing though is to do that. So if you want textured things, like for example I don't know, maybe a leather jacket or something like that, which has a texture to it, then you can use that sort of technique to actually impart a texture into the wood. This one thing about hardboard as well is it doesn't take secondary burning too well. So I am actually trying to darken this, and I've got quite a high heat on this tool, relatively speaking, or within what I'm normally comfortable in using, and it is it's working hard to try and darken off this shading. It's not doing it too well. Actually, one of the other things that impacts is what you've got the wood resting on, or how thick it is. This is quite thin hardboard. It's only a few millimeters thick, and what actually happens is a lot of the heat is actually being conducted away by the desk itself that I'm on, and that actually keeps the piece cool, which is kind of not what you want. You actually want a localized heat spot where you're working, because that's what actually chars the wood. Oh, actually the resin out of the wood. There's kind of three ways of getting dark areas. You can either turn the heat up and then you let dark areas really quickly, and one of the problems with that then is to keep the tip moving enough so that you don't actually burn through the wood. The other way is actually to keep the heat lower but actually hold it in place or move the tip a lot slower. Now one of the problems you get with that though is that the wood itself conducts the heat of the tip, which cools the tip, and in doing so then what you get is it has a variable effect. It is a little like turning the heat down. And the third way is basically just to go over it a lot of times, so you're effectively darkening it a bit each time, colouring it in and then colouring it in again and again. Now one of the things you can do with well, it's one of the characteristics of the machines actually providing the current to this tool, is to have ones which actually are capable of supplying a lot of current fairly quickly, and then as the tip cools off the machine is capable of keeping it heated. I think I'll probably leave this for the moment and move further on. The things I want to do, I think, is take the outside area of this around the edge. Not quite sure what I want to do with it at the moment. What I'm going to do is just apply an outline around at least some of the locomotive here, and allow me then to set the shade for the inside. course you don't also have to use the tools in any particular way. Here what I've done is I've actually turned the tool over, and I'm using the very tip of it now rather than the bowl which I was using before. What that allows me to get is a very fine line here, which otherwise what I'd have to do is use a knife style blade to get such a fine tip. Interestingly, I guess one of the things that pyrography is relatively good at is cartoon style work, because what you can then do with that is use what they tend to call a writing tip, or a ball tip sometimes, and actually outline the subject just like cartoons do with a black line often around the outside, and then effectively